but just how uninformed we are about the choices that we take, and actually most of our choices, where they come from and what we're basing them on. And it's a real tension for people who come to ResearchEd. People like me, I'm a school leader who is normally a research lead, so I support teachers with having the best knowledge, making judgments, and then I recognise that this world outside is ignoring evidence, is making quick-fire judgments based on evidence, on belief and on ideology. So, what do I do? It came up, this study I read, I don't know if people have seen it a couple of years ago. Daniel Gilbert is a bit of an expert on happiness. But actually, this study really did make me happy. But it revealed a lot. And there's about 11 different studies, hundreds of different people, some of them in psychology, groups, others on the internet. But effectively, we don't like to think. And we don't like to think hard. We're kind of an evolutionary kind of function. We like to, survive, and we make quick decisions as part of that survival basis. But we're asking people here today, think hard about your decisions. We want our policymakers to look at the evidence, to think really hard about it. But that little crack in all of our thinking is that we don't like to think hard, and we don't really want to think hard. And the one that struck me, one of the studies out of the 11, was that people would prefer to administer electric shocks to themselves rather than just think and daydream. Yeah, it is absurd, but that is human nature. There was more men who committed the electric shock, so maybe you're thinking, well, now that makes sense, sensation-seeking men. There was one person who shot themselves over 200 times in that period. Now that's an outlier. That's an old person who gets a kick, a masochistic kick out of shocking themselves. But then look at the world around us, and we are a masochistic species. Okay? And we are making decisions that ultimately we are pressing that electric shock button rather than think very hard. Okay? And people like this, okay, not just having awful haircuts, but they make headlines because those headlines seal the deal, because people don't want to think beyond the headline. And that's the reality. And we are all part of that. We all like to think that we're exempt of these kind of cognitive biases and humps. We're not, but we're probably not as far down the line as being completely ideological as some of the people. But we should recognise that that's a flaw in our thinking. And when I'm working in my English department and we're making decisions, we've all got our strong beliefs, we've all got our biases, we've all got our stories, and they will overwhelm a lot of the time the evidence that is presented. Okay? That's our lived experience as a school teacher. Okay? And I think that what I think is much more rational and unbiased. But of course, I'm biased too. So we're a masochistic species. And we are not making all of our decisions rationally. I'm on an SLT, we like to sit round and we like to talk for half an hour and drink lots of coffee and make reasoned decisions, but not all of that has a rational basis. Okay? Knowing that to help, but there's limitations. And when we look at policies being made this week, that is not about evidence and reasoned decision making, that is about calculated choices, that is about ideology and belief systems. Okay? So that's where that quotation comes from. I don't quite think that Michael Gove believes it fully. Okay? I think it was about winning an argument. But actually, what I do believe is that he's got a very narrow view of experts, and his version of evidence is partial. Okay? I think he's been bred in an argument-winning world. Okay? Politicians are about winning arguments, and they marshal the evidence they need to win the argument. Okay? And it made me think about this. This is happening. And why is that happening? It's not happening because of the evidence. It's not happening because of the evidence for social mobility. I think anyone who comes here today knows that. Okay? Because you've got a better grasp of the knowledge. 3% of free school meals, children go to grammar schools, that is not going to transform social mobility. Perhaps they've got something up their sleeve that we don't yet know that will. But the current existing model won't. But I even quite like the language. We will open new grammars. Right? It will happen. It is a policy, it's part of a narrative, it's part of a story. It may as well be 350 million a week for the NHS. That's what grammar schools are right now. And it's a big distraction, and as school teachers and school leaders, we need to try and not be distracted by it. Right? I can't help myself, I've talked about it this week, and I can't stop tweeting about it, but still, I am going to work it out of my system, work the annoyance and the emotion out of my system, and focus on doing a better job myself. And I really like this quotation. I don't think we are going to change the habits of policymakers. We are not going to change politicians, okay, because they will pay lip service to evidence and they will use it for their own ends, and that will be it. That is the case of how policy is made. We cannot change that. The only thing I think we can do as a profession and as school leaders is be really well informed so we can challenge it as much as possible. And we won't stop grammar schools, but we will mitigate it being a dual system that is terrifically damaging. Now that feels a bit of a kind of answer. It's not very inspiring. You will do less damage if we know more. But that's pretty much as we do, as we can do regarding policy, because it's not rational. Okay? I really like this story. I think I can very easily, I could fire shots at Nick Gibb, and I could fire shots at Michael Gove and Theresa May at will and enjoy doing it. Okay? But it won't get us very far. I'm trying to work out, right, well, how am I going to have some impact? How am I going to convince people? And also, as a school leader, I'm thinking, well, it's the same thing. So I'm trying to convince teachers to improve their practice, tweak what they do. I'm also teaching, 3 year 10 classes who don't want to do what I want them to do either. So I'm constantly working with that psychology. And this really stood out to me. This notion of prophecies and failings and strong beliefs. Okay? All of this decision-making in schools, decision-making policy is less about evidence, it's more about beliefs. So we need to understand beliefs. Now, what this study tells you is that this lady, Dorothy Martin, she was effectively the leader of a cult. Okay, in the 1950s America, and she got messages from outer space. It sounds absurd, but she got messages from outer space that told her that the world was going to end in December of 1954. Now, she had a group of followers, quite a large group of followers, okay, which included physicians. It included college graduates in America. Okay? This wasn't just kind of stupid people. This was people who are professional, who you would expect to make good, reasoned decisions. And they were following that strong belief. Some people gave up marriages, gave up jobs because they thought the world was going to end on the 20th of December 1954. And at 11:55, and Leo Festinger and his group of researchers were looking at this, at 11:55, they were getting ready for the 12 o'clock call. Because what they believed, the earth would be flooded, but they would be rescued by a spaceship. The spaceship didn't come at 12 o'clock. And you can imagine, and she cried. Okay? So the group's kind of infiltrated by these researchers. She cried, but really quickly, they noticed that another clock in the house at 11:55. So they quickly recalibrated their belief and said it was the clock was wrong. Okay? It's not our entire belief system that we've changed our lives for. We've got 5 more minutes. Okay? So they waited. And at the second time, 5 minutes later, it was 12:05 or it was 12 o'clock, depending on the accuracy of the clock, and nothing happened a second time. Okay? And some people were initially devastated, their expectations, what was going on. They'd given up their lives for this, their whole belief system was rooted in this happening. It hadn't happened. Now, over the coming day or two, quite a few people left the cult really quickly. But more of the group actually stayed and became vociferous. They wanted to speak to the press about it, whereas previously they were very hidden and didn't. And they actually spoke, and they articulated that it didn't happen because they prayed so hard. Okay? They found a get-out clause. They found a caveat to actually reinforce their beliefs. And they started to promote their group, the Seekers, they were called. They started to promote that group even more than before. So they had all this evidence that said you are completely wrong. Okay, your massive life choices were wrong. But that didn't actually change their belief system. It actually made them believe that little bit more. And that tells us a lot about human behaviour and how hard it is to actually change what we do. From small habits in the classroom to beliefs about how we should teach and how children should learn, and about school and about politics and everything else. And we need to recognise that that belief is rooted within all of us. First thing he said, there's 5 conditions. That it must be a deeply held conviction, that we must have done action, really committed ourselves, worked hard at committing to this belief. Then it's got to be something in the real world that's happened. It's got to be disconfirmed really clearly. But as long as we've got social support, we can keep that belief. We can rationalise anything as long as we're with a group of people who believe like we believe. Okay? Now, you might be on either side of the grammar school debate, but that's where the grammar school debate is. Okay? I've already had conversations on Twitter with people who fervently believe that grammar schools will work and are effective. And one of the quotes, one of the tweets, I tried to favourite it and Snapchat for this, but I couldn't and I can't find it, was lies, damn lies, statistics, and, quote, evidence. And that's where we are. That's where evidence will get you. And I'm easily disconfirmed as someone who's got strong beliefs that are completely flawed. And they probably think, right, well, I'm believing in spaceships. Okay? That social mobility will happen through grammar schools. And you can apply this to Brexit. You can apply this to lesson gradings in your school. You can apply this to an obsession with Ofsted. You can apply this to pretty much everything. When groups of people get a firm set of beliefs, they will resist a huge amount of evidence and carry on regardless. And if you try and challenge them, then actually, you might make it worse. So here's a summary. If they've got conviction, disagree, doesn't matter, facts and figures, damn lies and statistics, logic and facts, they won't see your point because their logic and facts are so rooted in their belief system. That's where we are. Okay? We are not scientists who are rationally balancing out evidence and making reasoned judgments all the time. I like to think I am. I like to think I'm so knowledgeable, doing all this research, but actually, we are still lawyers arguing our case that is rooted in what we've believed. Often our beliefs stem back to our childhood. I came to the first session this morning and Laura McInerney was talking about perfectionism and about attachments from childhood and attitudes we have to authority. Grammar schools, that's rooted in the experience of Theresa May and these 6 other cabinet ministers and everyone else. When you've had that deep experience, when you're waiting for the spaceship to come and everyone believes it, then you will stick with it. Okay? We want to be more like scientists. I think if we come to ResearchEd, we're happier to deal with uncertainty. We're maybe happier to be challenged. But maybe we're not. And I can challenge you to be thinking about your biases, your deeply held beliefs, and what they allow you to respond in terms of evidence and the range of evidence that you're looking at. Because I'm forever checking my beliefs, but still I know that I've got a deep-rooted system about what I think is education about. And it's what I've been practicing for a good few years. Okay? And it's hard to unpick that. So if we're going to use and have an evidence-informed school and teachers to adapt their processes, then we need to show them, make it feel it, tell them stories, and use evidence. And evidence probably won't be the first thing that we do. Okay? Because it's so much more than that. If you want to distill it down to something simple, it's the backfire effect. Okay? Misconception. So we think, challenge someone's belief in the facts. I could have a page of facts about grammar schools and social mobility, but actually, for some people, it probably won't matter a jot. And they will tell me, well, not the grammar schools we're creator. And it's the same with Brexit, and it's the same with policies in school and attitudes to Ofsted and attitudes to evidence. Okay? But it can backfire, so we need to be careful. And as when we're working with our class, we've seen things backfire. It applies to human nature. It's rooted in how we think. So I almost want to kind of shift away. Okay? We are not going to have rational policy based in good sense of evidence and practice at the whiteboard. We are not. We can mitigate it, we can adapt it. Maybe if we get more of a collective voice, we can challenge it, but we haven't yet, and that's something I'll come on to. But what we can do within our own schools is put that kind of umbrella into kind of batten down the hatches and resist the crap that is showered upon us regularly. And we can try and recognise those flaws and biases within our school, within our teams of teachers, and we can work there. So obviously, I'm not going to solve human nature, but I think we need to focus on the right place. And policymakers probably isn't where we should focus. We can get angry today, we can share evidence, and we should share our voice and our opinions, but we're probably not going to change anything because people's beliefs are sticky. Okay, so our school, that's my point about, well, there are always whirlwinds going on. We just need to, within our own building, within our own classroom, within our own departments, try and resist that as best we possibly can. One is recognising our decision making, recognising the biases we talked about. So, we've got high-risk consequences that affect our decision making. We want to make good decisions, but Ofsted are coming. So we're still going to do a work scrutiny, we're still going to do less observations, because there are high-risk consequences if we get it wrong. We want to look at alternatives, but sometimes there are a dizzying array of alternatives, too many, and it's difficult, so we go with what we know. We don't like uncertainty and complexity. Okay? We don't like it. Donald Trump might be the American president, one of the most powerful people on this planet, because people do not like complexity. Okay? We like simple, clear messages, and we don't like our beliefs to be challenged, and we like to not think very hard. Okay? And interpersonal issues as well. We are human institutions, and we've all got our beliefs and biases and our relationships where we don't like that other person, and that obviously impacts on our choices that we make and our decisions. So we're not very rational either. I think if we're coming to ResearchEd on a Saturday, then we're making a very good attempt at overcoming some of these hurdles. And I think there are solutions. Let's recognise, what does the evidence say about where school leaderships are coming from? And then school leadership impacts teacher choices as well, let's be honest. Past experience, evaluating different approaches, external evidence, learning from what works in the schools, considering what is most effective. What do we think has the biggest impact there? Past experience. It's kind of rooted in our beliefs and formed it over time. Any others? Other schools. Why that? Why that move?
Just in my current situation where we now have sister schools that we're just modeling what they're doing because they're good. Therefore, they must be the same.
Yeah, similarity. Okay? When we join our seeker cult, okay, we follow what other people are doing because of similarity, they've got similar experiences. And so it's about beliefs, isn't it? It's about people. It's not really about external research evidence. So what we must do is recognise, right, how do we align the people and influence people they know and put that together with the research evidence? Because otherwise we won't change anything. So it's a very human approach to improving our schools, that we take evidence, but it's got to align with our friendships, with our human groups, and it's got to look like something we're familiar with. We will buy something off the shelf if the school down the road used it very successfully. If that thing made the school outstanding, then a lot of people in our school say, let's do that thing. We often don't work out whether that will work out in context. Simple. So the NFER study in 2013 worked this out, and they looked at it primary, secondary, and all through. So our first response was past experience, and lo and behold, everyone. Now, that was where most people were going for. We base what we do on what we know. Now, that's not a surprise, is it? It's not a surprise, but actually, ask the question, how much of your teaching is based on how you were taught 10, 20, 30 years ago? Okay, because I think there's something quite deep-rooted in it about our behaviours. And then, considering other approaches, reading the toolkit, etc. It's quite low. It's evidence-based. Learning from what works in other schools, we're high again. Evaluating different approaches, well, there's so many approaches out there that we do a bit of that naturally. So we know where the answers that shape our behaviour. So we need to key into that and use it. It's the 3 Ps. Past experience, our peers, people just like us, and policymakers do as well. Okay? If we change the league table, we change behaviours. Those levers, we know they work, politicians know they work, so they pull those levers. They're the 3 things that impact what we believe and what we do, so we've got to align evidence with those. That's what we can do in our schools to help support teachers get better, and to change, and to challenge our own practice, challenge our inertia, challenge our unwillingness to think, and we all have that line of fire. We cast our net wider. Coming to ResearchEd on Saturday, I'm preaching to the converted in terms of casting your net, finding out more, wanting to be more knowledgeable, wanting to be challenged, even when we don't like being challenged. It mightn't change our beliefs, but at least we're going that step of challenging ourselves. And that's pretty impressive, particularly when someone's eating at lunch. What are our barriers? Those beliefs, won't go about one. Motivation. When we're tired, when we've got a busy working week, when all of our rewards come from jumping through the hoops of getting grade A's and all those other things, why are we motivated to go that extra step and read more and know more and go to training people aren't telling us to go to? We've got to key into that motivation of our staff. We've got to find time for teachers and colleagues. And it might just be, we find 10 minutes in the day. It might be that it's a social media thing. I do a lot of my writing and a lot of my twittering on public transport and in cars. My partner, she loves to drive, I hate to drive, I get lots done in the car. And it's finding those little creases of time and kind of overcoming that natural knackeredness we all feel. I'm exhausted enough to throw it back, I don't know about you, but we're still here. Training, better quality training. Okay? I think the standard of training nationally has been poor for decades. Okay? I think we're a spectacularly under-trained profession. Okay? We reach a minimum after a year or so, and then we get thrown into classrooms for years on end with marginal, not very effective, not well evaluated CPD. Earlier on, Rob Coe was talking about assessment and this assessment group. I've led training for research leads with Rob Coe. We had 8 days worth of training on evidence, on using it, on making decisions, on assessment. 8 days, full days, with homeworks in between everything else. And we barely scratched the surface of the knowledge and the skill needed to make great decisions daily. Yes, there's tacit expertise that we have from our experience, but still we can be better trained. Being connected. Being disconnected, if you're in a small school out on the coast, in Blackpool, and half of your catchment area is in the sea, you are so under pressure, you are so struggling for motivation because you're crushed by the weight of accountability, you are not engaging in evidence-based practice because that takes a bit of extra time, it takes extra resources, money, and you don't get any gains from it. So they're the barriers. What are the solutions? In a couple of minutes. I feel like I've focused on all the negatives, and you're going to get 2 minutes of positive. Or at least you can leave on a couple of positives. One thing, so Huntington School in York, we've just been made a research school, one of the EDF research schools, so there'll be 5, and it'll be announced in October, and there'll be 5 more the year after. Now, does a new school label and a new little cluster of groups change anything? Well, not really. But what this is an attempt to actually take real teachers with real beliefs and with real classroom experience and support them in an infrastructure that actually uses evidence, that is based upon evidence. And that runs training that is evidence-based. This isn't the OTP that is unevaluated and that is rolled out nationally and sold at a premium. We have to have a strong evidence base for training. We have to challenge people's beliefs, but because we're fellow teachers, we're more likely to receive it and discuss it rather than Nick Gibb telling us and then our instant, dislike, our walls are erected, and it helps connect us a bit more. It's a small step, but what research schools need to do is to help out teaching schools, because the whole point of teaching schools was to connect lots of teachers training each other. But who trained the teaching schools? Who validated their really great training? What evidence are they using? Now, I'm part of that system, so we need to do better. That's one small element that we actually work together. Big chains are areas, we used to call them LEAs, didn't we? Some of them might exist where you live. Where we network but effectively share it. We need to ask better questions that our teachers in our schools are bothered about. Here are some questions I thought of instinctively. Okay? What's the best marking approach that benefits my students? Okay? We get told at Mark all the time, I'm a senior leader, but I'm also an English teacher. So I'm not going to have a policy that doesn't think about this. And we need to think about evidence-based and think about training and support that answers the issues that we face, our students, but us as human beings as well. Otherwise, that wall will go up. Second one, behaviour management model. What would be most effective with my hormonal neonate students? Okay? We've all faced difficult classes. That's the solutions that we want. They're the questions we want answering, not what literacy programme works with students that aren't in my school for an expensive price that I cannot afford. Okay? We need to ask better questions because that's keeping us awake at night. Okay? What's the best revision strategies for me, English literature, for Year 11? Because we've got a new curriculum and they've got to remember shape loads. And I'm panicking about their exams, but they're not. Okay? So I need to do this better, so give me some better answers. ResearchEd needs to do a better job getting questions from us that we talk about, that are part of our belief system and our lived experience and our past, so that we can move forward. This isn't about getting told and done and to. We need some translation. My attempt is the likes of being here, writing blogs, writing a book. Okay? That's my attempt at translating a lot of evidence. The book that I wrote had about 100 references here, but they were at ends of chapters because people don't want to read that. They want to get into the nuts and bolts. They want some practical strategies. But I'm happy if those practical strategies are rooted in really good evidence, and I've done my very best job looking at the array of evidence that I can access. I'm happy enough about it. So we need a lot more of that. Okay? Teachers, social media, sharing, but it needs to be systematic. College of teaching. Okay, hands up if you've heard about college of teaching. Okay, hands up if you really know what they're going to do or do. We don't really know. Okay, some people are very vehemently against them. Okay, with a kind of anti-authority kind of instinct. And why wouldn't we? When decisions are made so badly, so regularly, why wouldn't we be against any new potential oppressor? But actually, let's give something a shot because we have not got a collective voice as a profession. Okay? We have not got a sense of what a broad evidence base is. We have not got that connection. Maybe the College of Teaching can do it. Alison Peacock, I've worked with her before, I like her. She'll make a good go of it as anyone. Let's support it. Let's try and build something. So when a new announcement comes out, that there's an immediate place where people go and ask that question. It doesn't stop us all still having a voice. We still have a voice. But maybe that can help. I don't know. I'm really willing to try it. And I think this is important as well. We need to challenge ourselves. If we want to be treated like a profession, we need to act like a profession. People who are coming here today are acting like professionals and knowing more and challenging themselves and even disconfirming some of their beliefs. And I really like this, and I stole it from Sir Kevin Collins, that lipsticks are far more tested than education products. Okay? I've never bought lipstick, let me just put that out there, okay? But I bought educational products based on slim evidence and basically advertising slogans. Okay, and probably everyone in this room is doing it too. And we should challenge ourselves to know more. Okay, if we're getting sold an intervention that's quite expensive or even quite cheap, does it work? What's your evidence for it? I make a big thing about challenging things as cheap as highlighters, because for Year 11 students, we were giving our students flashcards and we were spending 300 quid on highlighters. Why are we doing it? So if we're not training them, they're basically colouring in for 300 quid. Okay? So we need to ask those difficult questions, and we need to ask ourselves. And for me, this is the important thing. Even if it isn't about an absence of knowledge, we have not been trained like a proper profession should be trained. A year long, 2 year long, 5 year long, decade long, career long training. We do not get that. Okay? Back to reality. I was sitting in Rob Coe's session about assessment. I'm meant to know all of that stuff. Okay? It's quite clearly didn't know all of that stuff. And I sat on the train with him earlier on, acting like I knew all of that stuff. Okay? So it's about acquiring more. And we can't change whole school national policy all the time, but we can change what happens in our classroom, we can change what happens in our department, we can influence people's beliefs, and we can really input in training. Even if we're asking tough questions in our training, that is about being knowledgeable, and people are doing that here today. And it's a bit cheesy, and Obama's on his way out, but I want to think about Obama and not Donald Trump and Boris Johnson. Okay? That it is about us knowing more and emerging as a profession and acting like a profession to challenge the absolute nonsense that attends and leads our profession. Okay? So let's think less of them, more of him. He's not perfect either, but he's better than that. Okay? Right, I'm going to finish. Just keep your eye out for different research schools around the country. We'll be sharing updates, resources, etc. Most of it will be free access for you. And I've written a book, and I've tried to produce a lot of evidence that's practical and useful, and there are a few discount sheets on your way out. Thank you very much for coming.